A major controversy erupted online yesterday that we wanted to break down for you. So I don't know if you saw some of this, but 150 different artists and intellectuals and writers and journalists signed on to this letter that basically is in support of open debate and free speech and sort of against cancel culture. So I'm going to read you the first paragraph just so you get a sense of this thing. They write, "Our cultural institutions are facing a moment of trial. Powerful protests for racial and social justice are leading to overdue demands for police reform, along with wider calls for greater equality and inclusion across our society. But this needed reckoning has also intensified a new set of moral attitudes and political commitments that tend to weaken our norms of open debate and toleration of differences in favor of ideological conformity. As we applaud the first development, we also raise our voices against the second. The forces of illiberalism are gaining strength throughout the world and have a powerful ally in Donald Trump, who represents a real threat to democracy. But resistance must not be allowed to harden into its own brand of dogma or coercion. The democratic inclusion we want can be achieved only if we speak out against the intolerant climate that has set in on all sides." Okay, so people like Noam Chomsky signed on to this, J.K. Rowling, who's very controversial, Barry Weiss, Matt Iglesias, Zed Jelani, who you all know very well. So it was a wide, Wynton Marsalis. There's a wide range of artists and thinkers who signed on to this, some of whose ideology I agree with, some of whom I very much disagree with.
Sure.
However, look, my reaction to this was like, this is fairly non-controversial.
I can't imagine
exchange of information and ideas is like, how can you object to that, really? They don't go into any like particularly specific examples even where people could be like, oh, well, I totally disagree with you on that. It was just very high level, free exchange of ideas. Yeah. Yes, some of the people on this thing are total hypocrites and have engaged in like cancellation, cancel culture and all of that. So let's put that out there as well. But just on the substance of the letter, I was like, okay, what's the big deal here? But people freaked out.
People are freaking out because what they're saying is that this legitimizes the idea that there's cancel culture in the first place. And just to give you a perfect example about what has happened is that people, the left largely, is now trying to cancel the people who signed this letter.
Which just completely legitimates their point.
Their thesis. So this is one of the signatories of the letter, Jennifer Finney Boylan. She says, "I did not know who else signed that letter. I thought I was endorsing a well-meaning and vague message against internet shaming. I know Chomsky and Steinem and Atwood were in, and I thought, good company. The consequences are mine to bear. I'm so sorry." The most egregious example, though, is from a Vox staffer. Her name is Emily Vanderwerf, and she writes, "As a trans woman who very much values her position at Vox and the support of the publication, I was deeply saddened to see Matt Iglesias' signature on the Harper's weekly letter. Matt is entitled to his own opinion. However, but the letter, signed as it is by several prominent anti-trans voices and containing as many dog whistles as it does, ideally would not have been signed by anyone at Vox." She later goes on to say that she felt unsafe as a result of Matt Iglesias, a permanent person who also works at the same company as her, signing this letter alongside, who I assume she's saying is J.K. Rowling here. But she claims, here's what she claims: "I don't want Matt to be reprimanded or fired or even asked to submit an apology. I'm just doing anything that best would solidify the idea that he's being martyred for his beliefs. I just want to make clear that those beliefs cost him nothing, except, tweeting it out to 2,000 people. It's been liked over 13,000 times, and it's been widely discussed. It's like, you know exactly what you're doing when you put one of your colleagues on blast and you say, he makes me feel unsafe. That's in an internal company email if you do that. If you do that in public, you're calling him for him to be fired. You can say all you want. I don't want him to be fired. I don't want him to be reprimanded. I just wanted to start a conversation. You want to start the conversation in order to get your coworker fired because he signed the same letter and calling for free speech alongside J.K. Rowling? That is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard. And again, it only validates their thesis that we are living in a crazy moment where you can't. What was it, David Shore? This is the person, I think this is while you were gone. He was a researcher.
No, I was there for that. Who got fired.
Who got fired for like citing a black man's research around police violence or something like that. That is insane. Sorry, that means we're living in an insane moment. And I'm generally loath to be like, the left is canceling everybody. But it's true. It's actually happening.
So here's the thing is, I get some of the sensitivity. I want to try to put the hat on of the other side. And I do get some of the sensitivity around, like, Trump is out there, like, talking, literally using words cancel culture and saying there's some cultural revolution that's going to indoctrinate our children. Tucker's saying the same. And, I think that is ridiculous and absurd. And there's no coordinated movement. And the fear is that you're, like, giving them a talking point. But I hate that thinking, because that thinking is what pervades so much of, like, resistance liberalism. Of basically, you're not allowed to tell the truth if you in any way give any comfort to your enemies in telling that truth. So look, I don't think that this is the cultural revolution. I don't think that this is the #1 issue in America. I think if you polled Americans, they'd be like, I care about the pandemic and my frickin' job and, like, staying safe and not dying and being able to earn a living. Right? But that doesn't mean that this isn't a real thing. And the reaction to this shows that it is, in fact, a real thing. Because if you put aside the people that are on the letter and whether you agree with them or not, or they're problematic or toxic, I mean, that's one of the things I really object to that we've talked to spoken to here as well, that, like, if this person is problematic, then also everybody who associates with that person is also, like, infected with that.
Madness.
It is insane. And so let's put aside the people who are on it for a moment. If you just read the substance of this letter, it is so innocuous.
Yeah, exactly.
The fact that it would be so triggering to people is actually deeply disturbing. And me, as someone who tends to have this view of, like, cancel culture, I mean, it's a thing and let's talk about it, but it's not that big a deal. It actually the response to it made me be like, oh, maybe this is a bigger issue than I have frankly given it credit for being.
That's exactly, and Robbie Suave, we disagree on a lot, the libertarian guy. Reason he actually wrote the book he called it. He was talking about how when this kind of campus culture, which everybody obsessed over, migrates into the most elite institutions in America, newsrooms, etc. This is what happens. They bring their norms and what they want, cancellation and unsafe language and all this other stuff back into the workplace, and that is what has a broader cultural phenomenon.
And throughout American history, it has much more often been the left that has been, like, censored, deplatformed, shut down. That's why you see someone like Chomsky, and we talked to Zed about this earlier in the week. That's why you see someone like Chomsky really taking a firm stand here, because he has in his life been, deplatformed and silenced and shut down and threatened and all of those. Like, anyone on the left who doesn't understand the history, that this tends to fall much more heavily on the left than the right, is just wearing massive blinders. Like, if you don't think that this is going to come for you, especially people who are focused on, really sensitive issues like the Israeli-Palestinian relationship, or the future of that country. I mean, these are things that can get you censored, fired, banned, like, completely shunned from polite society. There's also an idea that the individuals who signed this letter are, like, privileged. And in a way they are, right? These are people with massive platforms and massive power. And so the idea was kind of like, they're just worried about their own standing and jobs. And yes, I'm sure that is part of the dynamic, is, like, they're worried about their own ability to speak. But no one's going to be able to cancel, like, Noam Chomsky. No one's going to be able to cancel and, like, sideline Wynton Marsalis or J.K. Rowling. It really is actually more of a danger for people who have less of a platform, less of, sort of allies to back them up. They're the ones who are really at risk, like the woman with the Halloween costume, like, really at risk of having their lives destroyed and ruined and their jobs lost with no recourse and nothing else that they can do. So in a way, I see this as people who are using their big platforms, and yes, in a certain sense, it is self-serving, but actually to speak up for people who don't have that platform and are equally subject to the whims of this, like, name and shame kind of culture.
I feel especially bad if I was 21 and looking into going into journalism, having heterodox views like I do. I don't know if I would do it in this current environment. I would think, you know what, they're going to come after me, they're going to fire me, I'm never going to be able to do that. Or worse, if you already work in conservative media, you're looking out there, you're just going to ghettoize yourself forever, because you're going to say, you know what, can't work with these people whatsoever. They'll try to destroy you. It's easy, and then you become much more reactionary. That's not a good thing. I actually want to read, this is from Zed Jelani tweeted this out. I'm always citing Zed here. It was about George Orwell. He actually had an essay called The Freedom of the Press. And it was actually intended as an introduction to Animal Farm. And it was his biggest fear, George Orwell's biggest fear, was actually self-censorship rather than censorship from the government. So this is what Orwell wrote. The chief danger to freedom of thought and speech at this moment is not the direct interference of any official body. If publishers and editors exert themselves to certain topics out of print, it is not because they are frightened of prosecution, because they are frightened of public opinion. And in this country, intellectual cowardice is the worst enemy a writer or a journalist has to face. That sinister fact about literary censorship is largely voluntary. Think about all of the voluntary censorship that people are going to engage in because they see the reaction to this letter. Think about, I mean, even in scholarship right now, academia at Princeton, they say that all racial studies have to be peer-reviewed by people of color who hold confirmed anti-racist study. That's insane. You can't have that. You can't have academic scholarship be viewed through an ideological lens. This is pervading the highest institutions of all of our elite culture, much to our dismay and our destruction, honestly.
That self-censorship point is really interesting. And if we're honest, I'm sure everyone out there, and us as well, we're not exempt from this. Absolutely. You're always weighing, is it worth saying this given the backlash that I'm going to face? Should I add it? What caveats? How can I protect myself? Because I just don't want to deal with it today. And no, is it the end of the world if someone comes for you on Twitter? No, it's not. But what we're talking about here isn't people's individuals feelings so much as the kind of culture that you generate and the narrow confines. This is you want to talk about manufacturing consent, the narrow confines within which you're allowed to operate is really ultimately destructive to those who want to fundamentally change the culture. If you're good with the status quo, then keep the narrow confines and you're good to go. Yeah. If you want to be if you have radical ideas, if you have heterodox ideas, if you want to challenge people's thinkings and take risks intellectually, there's going to be a much more narrow space for that to operate. I do want to say that part of the issue that people have that I think is really legitimate is there's a lot of hypocrisy on the right around this, where it's very narrow view of, they don't want themselves to be canceled, but then when it comes for someone else or when someone hurts their feelings, then all this, they're exactly. And look, to me, the biggest and most terrifying example of this that we have seen and threat to actual First Amendment rights was President Trump having, the military, police, and the National Guard crush peaceful protesters. And so if you aren't speaking out against that attack on free speech, then I think that you are very hypocritical trying to glom onto it in other areas. So I think that's where other of the discomfort comes in. But just because somebody's a hypocrite on the issue doesn't mute the point or undermine the point ultimately that the letter is making.
Well, then the whole point is then call out the hypocrisy and ask that person to face their hypocrisy. Fine, that's fine, right? I mean, that's what people have to do. That's the way that you actually are always going to be combated.
Rather than putting blinders on and pretending that it's not a real thing that's happening.
There you go. All right.
A lot of thoughts on that one. All right, more Rising for you after this.